I'm a neuroendocrinologist, and I study how circadian rhythms and other external cues such as light can impact health and well-being, including reproductive function. Circadian rhythms are biological processes that follow a roughly 24-hour cycle. These include things like the sleep-wake cycle, but they actually impact so much more than that. External cues are essentially used by the circadian system in order to time our physiology to the external world. And one of those cues, the kind of main primary cue, is actually light. And so we know that when light comes in, it essentially tells our body what time it is and allows us to align hormone release and tissue functioning to the correct time of day. This becomes really important in reproduction, which requires precise timing of hormone release and then target tissue function. The light piece is especially important is because we know that there's a huge portion of the population, including shift workers, and shift work is just work that takes place outside of your typical 9 to 5. And shift workers are actually exposed to either night at light or mistimed light. So they often rotate between nighttime shifts and then either daytime light or even daytime work shifts. So we know that shift work is actually really linked, especially in terms of female fertility, to reduced reproductive outcomes. Shift workers are at increased risk for menstrual disorders, as well as subfertility to infertility and pregnancy complications. So while we know that this is real, we don't actually know what is causing it. And so my work essentially explores how one aspect of shift work, that exposure to mistimed light, could lead to reduced fertility. We've developed a rodent model, so a mouse model of rotating lights. These lights mimic essentially how the types of light exposure that shift workers would be exposed to. And so we have the mice essentially going from a day shift to a night shift and then back again. And what's really exciting is that we see that these types of lights actually disrupt the circadian timekeeping system and lead to downstream issues in female reproductive cycles. About half of the females on our shift work light conditions actually exhibit irregular reproductive cycles. So this is kind of the mouse version of a menstrual cycle. And what's really interesting is that these mice have downstream reproductive issues. So they have issues with hormone release and their ovarian function. So we have these kind of two populations of our shift working mice. The one population has these irregular menstrual cycles, and the other populations are actually very similar to controls in all of the reproductive cycle metrics we've had. So these mice are able essentially to adapt to these rotating lights really well. And this is really exciting because we think this is kind of a resistance phenotype. And then the second piece is we wanted to understand if these shift working mice could get pregnant. And so we were expecting some issues in fertility. And what's interesting is that we actually don't see any fertility issues. So all of our shift working mice were able to get pregnant, but we do see reductions in the litter size, as well as we see a really high rate of pregnancy complications, specifically dystocia, which is when pregnancy is not able to progress, so you essentially can't get baby out. And so this is really important because we now have kind of this potentially resilient population that's not actually resilient in terms of pregnancy complications. So this research is really important for kind of two main reasons. The first is that we have this really exciting animal model where we can recapitulate what we see in human shift workers. So that approximately 50% with menstrual disorders is actually seen in human shift workers. And so we see that we're kind of finding the same thing in our animal model. And this is exciting because if we can understand why, this is kind of what distinguishes between our resilient population and our population with issues. We can try to find some type of biomarkers that will potentially help us understand who might be more at risk for menstrual dysfunction if they were to go on shift work. And then that second piece is really that even women who engage in shift work without reproductive issues are probably at risk for pregnancy complications. And so regardless of whether your menstrual health is impacted by shift work, it might not be safe to engage in shift work during pregnancy.